Since 1948, Lotus has pioneered engineering vehicles that are more agile, more engaging, and lighter. However, it's 2025, this is the Lotus Eletre SUV, and at 2.8 tons, we're asking one question. Is this still a Lotus? Now, the Lotus Eletre is available in Malaysia in three guises. You can either get it as an Eletre, an Eletre S, or an Eletre R. Now, the majority of Eletras sold in Malaysia are like this, the Eletre S, which is the mid-spec model, packing a 116 kilowatt-hour battery and 2 electric motors. Performance on this car is absolutely explosive, while still providing about 500 to 520 kilometers of range on a single charge. Now, in terms of charging, because this is built off of an 800-volt architecture, 10 to 80% can be achieved in just 20 minutes via a 350 kilowatt DC charger. And in terms of AC charging, this car can accept up to 22 kilowatts AC, meaning a dead to full charge takes anywhere between 5 to 6 hours. Not bad for something this big, and it does mean that there is proper potential for this car to do long distance trips. But of course, when we talk about the Lotus Eletre, the first thing you want to talk about is the way it looks, because naturally that's the first thing that you will find absolutely arrests your attention. Now, because the Eletre is a new generation Lotus, that means that we also get a new generation of design language. So up front, we get a pair of very slim LED daytime running lights right up top, which also double up as scrolling indicators, while the main beams and high beams live below. You can option those with adaptive high beam, like this car has, in order to provide better illumination at night. The front end also sees the use of what Lotus calls porous design, which basically means that as many air openings have been integrated into the car as possible in order to give this car an absolutely excellent aerodynamic coefficient. Which is why, for example, you see huge air ducts up the front which actually vent up over the bonnet in order to improve this car's aerodynamic efficiency. You also get a set of active louvers down below which open and shut like flowers, which look absolutely fantastic, although it's very difficult to get them on camera. And then as we move down the side, again, you can see where a lot of that porous design language pays dividends. So for example, you have air intakes at the front that feed over these wheels. Speaking of which, these wheels are actually optional extras. These are 22-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Pirelli P0 electric tires. Now, this car comes as standard with 21-inch wheels. You can option them all the way up to 23 should you like, although we feel the 22s are just right. This car also comes with the optional blackout pack, which is why you see a lot of the details on this car, like the Lotus Rundle in the front and the Lotus badging in the rear, are done in black. However, this solar yellow does come as part of the standard palette of colors, including things like blossom gray, khaki white, and several other things which I think make this car look absolutely fantastic, although personally there is a carmine red and a deep green metallic that makes this car look sensational. Now, because this is a modern electric car, naturally you get a bunch of sensors all over the place, which brings my attention to this. These are not tow hooks, these are actually deployable LiDAR. For an extra 18,000 ringgit, you can option this car with level 2 semi-autonomy, which allows you to use the LiDAR system which is built into the wings on either side as well as up on the roof. You'll also find another LiDAR unit in the back, which gives this car some of the best ADAS functionality that you can expect within this class. That's also why you get cameras here on the nose and out the back in order to provide an excellent 360 view as well. Now, because the Lotus Eletre is a hyper SUV, naturally you get frameless doors as well as deployable door handles, which means that when the car locks, it sits flush against the bodywork. These glass panels are also noteworthy for being dual laminate acoustic glass, which means that again, you have better NVH inside. These cars do also come as standard with soft close, as you'd expect from a full-size luxury car. Now, when I say full size, I really do mean full size, because the Lotus Eletre measures in at a little over 5.5 meters long, which makes this actually a little bit longer than a Range Rover. This car is massive, but because of its proportionate design, its intricate use of design language of creases and folds in the bodywork, as well as that porous design that I mentioned earlier in order to optimize aerodynamics, it looks a lot less bulky, even though it offers just as much luxury, as I'll explain a little bit later. At the rear, again, you see that very extensive use of aerodynamic understanding in order to shape the rear end of the Eletre. You have huge air breathers that come in from the back of the rear wheels and give out over here in order to improve downforce. You also get these twin rear spoilers, which are separated in the middle in order to make room for that LiDAR module, again providing necessary downforce while not intruding or getting in the way of this car's active safety features. You also get this little bit of carbon fiber up here on the lip spoiler, although I'm pretty sure this is an option, but Lotus says it isn't. Now you also get, naturally, a full width LED light bar replete with scrolling indicators up here, and I do think that they look absolutely fantastic. It makes this car look very, very distinctive at night, although the one option on this car that I disagree with is the black lettering for the Lotus badging here, because it simply disappears into the bodywork. Great if you're trying to look subtle, not so great when your car is already bright yellow. Now further down, obviously you have a little bit more aerodynamic trickery in order to improve airflow. The underside of this car is also notably completely flat in order to reduce the amount of turbulence kicked up underneath the vehicle itself. Now behind the tailgate, which is powered as standard, you will find a huge amount of space. Because this car is so long, a lot of that actually pays dividend back here. So this boot, for example, is deep enough for you to fit a golf set in here without too much issue at all. You also get a two-piece parcel shelf, one up here and one down here, which is also wrapped in leather to match the interior specification of your car, which means that even the act of covering your luggage is done in a truly thoughtful and luxurious way. Now, underneath the boot floor, you will actually find a little bit of space, although it isn't all that much. In fact, if you look down here, you will find that there is just enough space for your charging cables, and that's about it, because this is all the space that you're meant to have. And underneath the bonnet, you won't find that much space either, because that's simply not what this car is designed for. Instead, the Eletre is designed to take all you need in here, and that's it. Now, because the Eletre comes as standard on air suspension, also means that you can make this car kneel down if it's easier for you to get things in and out with a slightly lower load lip, although honestly it doesn't make that much of a difference. And if you get this car as a 5-seater, you can actually fold the rear seat 60-40 for added practicality, although that's not what's been specified to this car. Now, the interior of the Eletre is unlike any Lotus that has come before it, because this interior is not only incredibly beguiling to look at, but it's also so beautifully tactile to interact with. Every surface that you touch is wrapped in leather with beautiful double stitching, which you can customize. And all the way down here, it's still more lovely Napa leather. This car looks and feels fantastic. Even to the bottom edges of the door cards, even down here is all covered in leather. Only ever broken up by the metal speaker grills for this car's upgraded 22-speaker KEF audio system. And then, of course, being a modern car, naturally, all of the controls are centered in this screen. Now, this screen is perhaps one of the highest definition screens currently available on the market. If I'm not mistaken, it's 2.5K resolution, which means that all the graphics appear very, very crisp indeed, and the colors are incredibly rich. This actually runs a system that is designed to run off of Unreal Engine with an incredibly powerful processor behind it, which is why, as you can see here, it's incredibly reactive to any changes there might be. In fact, if I show you the driver's door, if I pop the door open, it immediately reacts. And as you can see, the seat and the steering wheel are moving out the way in order to improve ingress and egress. But I digress. Going back to it, because all the controls are centered in here, the user interface has been extensively worked on in order to provide the sort of interface and experience that you would want. So for example, adjusting vehicle settings is relatively easy because all the touch points are quite large. Everything is set up in a sort of manner that seems to be very natural. And as far as I'm concerned, this ranks as one of the better in-car infotainment systems, certainly not as infuriating as what you get from high-end BMWs. More importantly, this also comes as standard with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which takes up the entirety of the screen, which means life is very easy if you just want to pair your phone and get on with it. The only trouble is, like many modern cars, your HVAC controls live down here, although you do have a couple of rocker switches here in order to change your temperature. The problem is the air vents in this car are also electronic, which means that you spend a lot of time in here faffing about with where you're trying to put the vent, which I find particularly irritating. It really wouldn't have killed anyone if there were manual sliders in order for me to adjust my air conditioning vents, because it's one of those things I want to be able to do quickly. And on top of that, doing that on this screen means that it takes over your Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, and then once you're done, you have to hit yet another trigger in order to bring it back because it doesn't display it as by default. Now, in addition to this display, there are actually two more. There is a ribbon display in front of the passenger which shows you your media functions and media controls, which is always nice to see. Or if there's nothing playing like there is right now, it just shows you your time and date. On this side, it serves as your instrument cluster. And I must say that whatever learnings they've taken from Smart have been applied here, because although this ribbon screen is actually narrower than what you get from a Smart, all the information is displayed in a way that's very, very easy to understand. And if you want any more information beyond that, you can actually see it by this car's full color heads-up display, which can be either tuned to show you only your basic functions or expanded to show you even ADAS functionality, which is always nice to see. And because it's directly in your line of sight, you really have no excuse to be speeding. Now, as we move further down, there's a wireless charging pad here, a couple of cup holders, which are actually set in such a way that you can push them up so they create this nice sort of flat feeling down here. You can push them down to hold a drink. You also have a decently sized center console bin here, which is very deep and lined in felt, which means that anything that you put in here is not going to rattle about. You'll also find your USB-C ports in here, which means that if you have a phone plugged in, that's going to go in there. Now, if you don't option the 22-speaker KEF audio system, you actually get a little bit more space down here, which is large enough for like a handbag, should you so want it. But if that's not enough, you also get a glove box, which deploys like this, also lined in felt, which is nice and comfortable, which also means that anything you put in there is not going to rattle about either and disrupt the serenity of this cabin. In terms of door cards, these are large enough for 1.5 litre size bottles easily. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you could fit a MacBook in here without too much issue at all, which means that this car ticks the boxes both in terms of luxury as well as practicality, which is what you want from a high-end luxury SUV. Now, in the back of the Eletre, there are a couple of options in this car that I'd like to point out. Firstly, the vehicle that you see here is a 4-seater, which includes the rear executive seating package, which essentially takes the front seats and puts them in the back, which means that these seats can be adjusted for a myriad of things. For example, I can adjust my seat base position should I so want to, so I can get nice and close to the driver if I want to irritate them. And I can also lean this backrest back quite a way, which means that over a long distance trip, for example, I can get very, very comfortable indeed. On top of that, these seats also offer lumbar support, side bolster support, as well as massage. You also get heating and ventilation, all of which can be manipulated via this screen. Now, by the press of a button, the screen presents itself to you at a more reasonable angle. And from this, you can adjust your air conditioning, your seat settings, as I mentioned earlier, as well as your sound settings. So as I mentioned, this car comes with a 22-speaker KEF audio system. And because of that, that allows you to tailor the soundscape in this car to exactly what you want. So no matter if you're sat in the front or the rear, you can enjoy a fantastic aural experience. That's AURAL, before any of you start making assumptions. Now, one thing that I would like to point out is the fact that while you get the center console, it is quite practical. So for example, you get a couple of those cup holders that I mentioned earlier. You get a relatively large center console bin here, replete with 2 USB-C ports. You get another cubby hole down here, which is also lined in felt. And you even get more storage in between the rear seats. Now, this is not air conditioned or cooled, but it does seem to be shaped suspiciously for a bottle of champagne. Anyway, beyond that, you can adjust your air conditioning settings in here, which is very important because this is also how you control your vents. Now, the vents on the B pillar mercifully are manual, which means that you can just reach out and adjust them to how you want them. However, the crotch cooler here in the middle, that is something that requires manipulation via this screen, which is less than ideal. Now, on that note, because it's only these vents, I'm willing to forgive it somewhat. More importantly, from this same menu, I can adjust my heating and ventilation on the seats. I can adjust my massage function, or if I can't be bothered with any of those things, I can just switch it off and the screen is off, which means I can sit here and simply enjoy the experience. Now, if you were to get this car as a 5-seater, this screen will live over here to adjust the same functionality. On top of that, the 5-seater also gets heating and ventilation on the outer seats, although obviously not in the middle. And also, you still get some degree of backrest recline, but they are not nearly as comfortable as this rear seat executive package. Now, before you ask why anyone would want to have this over the 5-seater, you would be surprised to know that a number of customers are actually using their Eletres as chauffeur-driven vehicles. As such, with rear seat comfort being at the very pinnacle of that experience, having seats like this do help out quite a bit. That said, however, this screen is not as smart as what you get in certain other vehicles. So this, for example, can't show me YouTube or Spotify. I can adjust my music settings should I so want to change the track or change the the volume or whatever, but I can't display anything on it, which is slightly unfortunate. Although I imagine that these functions are all things that can be updated via software over time. So there is a very good possibility that this screen will become smarter over time as well. Now, I know that this puts us all in a very difficult position because yes, you can put ISOFIX mounts. Yes, there's plenty of legroom. Yes, it's all very comfortable. But I'm talking about these things in the context of a Lotus. So I know that it sounds very odd that I'm in the back seat of a Lotus and I'm not being slowly strangled to death. That's because, as I said at the beginning of this review, the Eletre is a new generation of Lotus. And so, while it is more practical and more luxurious and better built and better specified, the question now is, does the experience from that seat still measure up? Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is the Lotus Eletre S, which is the mid-spec model. So while this car still offers all-power traction, in terms of overall performance, it's not the hottest thing in the world. That said, the 0 to 100 times and the power figures on this car are still heady indeed, enough for this to be considered a proper performance SUV. Now, the thing about the Eletre is that the Lotus badge might deceive you. On the one hand, you may think that this is an out-and-out performance experience, which means that there will be some degree of compromise in terms of day-to-day livability. But to that end, I'll tell you that that isn't the case. For starters, the Lotus Eletre comes with air suspension, dual chamber in fact, which means that this car offers a ride so plush that again you wouldn't really believe the badge. In fact, if you were to ask me, I think this car rides about as well as any BMW or in fact even an electric Mercedes-Benz. And then, of course, there is the fact that this car comes with all sorts of convenience features. So, for example, as standard now, the front seats come with not only things like lumbar adjustment, lower thigh adjustment, as well as your flank adjustment here, or your side bolsters to hold you in place, but they even come with a massage function, heating and ventilation, all again as standard. As a result, it means that living with this, driving a Lotus Eletre day to day, could not be any more comfortable. And of course, if you get the executive rear seat package that we mentioned earlier in this video, you will know that those rear seats offer exactly the same functionality, with the ability to recline up to a pretty ridiculous angle if you ask me. So far, so good. On top of that, there are also options like rear wheel steering in order to reduce this car's turning circle, make it feel a little bit more maneuverable. Although, of course, like many of the things I mentioned, these are cost options. However, once you put all of that together, you end up with a package that is pretty livable day to day. Although it is worth pointing out that this car is not only longer, but also wider than a standard wheelbase Range Rover, which means that driving it around does require the same kind of attention to placement. That said, the 360 cam in this car is pretty good. The ultrasonic sensors around the car are also quite accurate and quite sensitive, which means that should you start to get a little bit too close to something, the car should warn you. So that's pretty good. Now, in terms of on-road refinement, I did have the privilege very recently to drive an Eletre S just like this all the way to Penang and back. And so I can tell you that in terms of high-speed refinement, this car is excellent. Doing well north of the national speed limit will reveal that this car is incredibly quiet despite the 22-inch alloy wheels, which suggests to me that these acoustic glass panels all the way around the car are really doing their work, as well as the amount of sound deadening that is placed between you and the wheels. Of course, because this car has a very long wheelbase, it also means there's more space for, again, more sound deadening material in order to keep this car feeling nice and quiet. On top of that, you can also option the highway assistance pack on this car, which essentially activates the LiDAR that already comes fitted in order to provide level 2 semi-autonomous driving. As set up, you can sit there and munch away motorway miles without any issue at all. In fact, as I'm speaking to you now, I have my ventilated seat going, I have my massage going, which means that I'm a very, very comfortable camper in this car indeed. But of course, motorway refinement and motorway poise are certainly things that you'd expect of a Lotus. On the latter, this car does have that nice, comfortable ride that irons out the worst imperfections on the road while still maintaining very, very good body control. Floaty is not a word that you'd associate with the Eletre no matter what you do. This car feels like it's always connected and communicates that back to the driver, while the steering wheel is completely numb. At the very least, the seats, for example, do a very good job at communicating that information back to you. However, It's in terms of day-to-day usability, in terms of urban driving, that I think a lot of people will be considering, or that's a question mark for a lot of people, because ultimately the Lotus Eletre competes with vehicles like the Lamborghini Urus, the Aston Martin DBX, which means that those cars, as good as they are, all run V8s, which means that you're spending a lot more on fuel. That means that when you're stuck in traffic, it's going to be very wasteful. And of course, having a big engine like that and trying to keep it in or rein it in as you're stuck in urban traffic is a little bit of a challenge in and of itself. And so having an EV like this means that you can have the explosive performance while not compromising in terms of day-to-day usability. Now, to that end, I think that the Eletre does a deceptively good job. Now, if you look at the dimensions, you wouldn't imagine that this would be a particularly good urban car, and I completely understand why. In fact, it is to do with the fact that this car is so long and so wide that you'd immediately assume that this car would be a pig to drive about in town, but that is not the case at all. In fact, the Eletre carries itself really, really well. That fantastic 360-degree camera, for example, as well as those sensors, allow you to drive this car with a certain degree of confidence. For example, in one day, I had to drive from mine all the way into Mid-Valley and then followed to a trip to Pudu, like central Pudu, and then to Mont Kiara. And this was all done during peak traffic hours. Now, in that time, using level 2 semi-autonomy, this car was incredibly comfortable. And of course, upon arriving at each destination where there were various narrow parking ramps, etc., the Eletre never really felt like a handful, at least not more so than any other large luxury or high-performance SUV, which meant that life in this car felt absolutely sublime. That actually answers a question that I think a lot of people will inevitably ask. Whether you realize it or not, the Eletre needs to be able to do duty as a day-to-day urban driver, and this car can do it. Now, of course, between those two things, when you look at the badge, again, you may be more concerned with this car's dynamic abilities. But as I said earlier, this car is very dynamic to drive. When you attack a B road, you put this car into sport mode and suddenly everything tightens up. There's almost no body lean at all, and it just feels so fantastic to drive. Although there is a caveat to that, because naturally the Eletre is a 2.8-ton hyper SUV, not exactly a car with a weight that would suggest that it is something you can chuck around. And so when you take that into account, when you realize the fact that there is no arguing or negotiating with physics, then this car does make a lot more sense and it drives the way you expect it to. It's not going to have quite the razor's edge driving experience that you get from, say, a Ferrari Purosangue or perhaps an Aston Martin DBX, but for what it is and for how heavy it is, the Eletre does an impressively good job. It changes direction in a way that you simply wouldn't expect a vehicle this large or this heavy to do. And then when you're done attacking a B road, you just chill back out on the motorway, turn on the ADAS and just cruise back home in absolute comfort. This car is excellent in terms of that duality between driver's car and luxury limousine. And of course, that is only made even better when you take this car with the executive rear seat pack, which allows you to enjoy yourself even more when you're sat in the back being chauffeured. The Lotus Eletre is, to answer the question at the very beginning of this video, not the Lotus that you'd expect. If you have had any history with this brand, if you've driven vehicles like the Elise or the Evora or the Exige, then this will feel like night and day. Those cars felt like proper hemmed-in driver's cars. They felt like go-karts with added bits of trim in order to make it road legal. Whereas this Eletre was designed from the outset to be a plusher, more luxurious experience. And to that end, I think they've nailed that part of the brief excellently. And as for the spirit of a Lotus, while we can't run away from physics, and ultimately if people want an electric hyper SUV, then they're going to get one. But I think that the spirit of Lotus has been retained because this car drives with a certain degree of ability that you just can't get anywhere else. Even compared to vehicles like the Porsche Taycan, for example, now that feels like a much more visceral experience, especially with the current setup of the powertrain. That car will throw you back in your seat without any issue at all, whereas in the Eletre, it feels a lot more approachable, which means that you are then more willing to exploit this car's ability all the way up to its furthest edges. This is an excellent excellent luxury performance SUV. And the fact that it is electric, it means that this is a car that you can drive every day. If you're one of those people who consider swanning about in a Lamborghini Urus, then I ask you to consider a vehicle like this. Although if you're after the badge, then a Lamborghini is a Lamborghini and a Lotus is a Lotus. But arguably, to me, this car represents not only an excellent return to form for Lotus, but it also seems to promise a stronger, brighter future for the brand, which is something that I certainly look forward to seeing. Now, if you're in the market for a hyper SUV, if you want something that looks like the car designers got high on acid, then you can consider the Lamborghini Urus, because obviously that car looks like nothing else on the road. But then again, the Lotus Eletre also has an incredible amount of road presence. And of course, if you want something that is a little bit more restrained, then there is naturally the Aston Martin DBX, which to me looks fantastic but doesn't offer nearly as much practicality as the Lotus Eletre. It's got more legroom, it's got more boot space. This is a car that is more usable day to day. So in case you're wondering, yes, I do think the Lotus Eletre is a car that you absolutely need to consider if you're shopping within this segment. On top of that, because the prices start at about 600,000 ringgit, there is plenty of space for you to option up and personalize your car to exactly the way you want it. So that concludes our pretty beguiling review of the Lotus Eletre S. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe and jangan bodoh.